The weight you have been carrying was never meant to crush you. The anxious thoughts that wake you in the middle of the night, the quiet fears about tomorrow, the constant replaying of what if in your mind, these are not signs that you are weak. They are signs that you have been trying to control what was never yours to control. Worry is not proof that you care deeply. It is proof that you have forgotten who is holding your life. And today, something must shift, not because your problems suddenly disappear, but because your perspective finally aligns with the truth. Do not worry about anything. Trust God. Worry feels productive. It convinces you that by thinking harder, stressing longer, and preparing for every possible outcome, you are protecting yourself. But worry never adds protection. It only drains strength. It does not prepare you for tomorrow. It robs you of today. You can feel it in your body, in your spirit, in the way joy has become fragile and peace feels temporary. Worry slowly teaches your heart to live in the future while God is inviting you to live in trust right now. Worry is not just a feeling that comes and goes. It is a weight that slowly settles on the soul when a person begins to carry responsibilities that were never meant to rest on human shoulders. Many people assume worry is proof of maturity or care, but in reality, it is evidence of misplaced ownership. When worry dominates the heart, it reveals an attempt to control outcomes that only God can govern. The human mind was created to think, reflect, and discern, but not to endlessly rehearse fear. The heart was designed to love, hope, and trust, not to absorb constant anxiety. This is why worry feels so heavy. It does not fit the design of the soul. At first, worry can feel useful. It creates the illusion of preparedness. It whispers that if you think hard enough, plan far enough ahead, and anticipate every possible problem, you will be safe. But over time, that illusion collapses. Worry never produces clarity. It produces exhaustion. It does not strengthen you for tomorrow. It weakens you today. The more you carry it, the more it drains your emotional, spiritual, and even physical strength. This is not accidental. Worry is heavy because it was never meant to be carried. God never intended for you to hold the full weight of your life. He did not design you to manage every outcome, predict every risk, or fix every problem. When worry takes root, it shifts your focus inward towards your limitations, your fears, and your lack of control. That inward focus becomes overwhelming because the human capacity is finite. No matter how strong you are not created to be self-sustaining. You were created to depend on God. The heaviness of worry is a signal, not a failure. It is your soul's way of telling you that you are holding something that does not belong to you. Just as the body aches when it carries more weight than it was built to handle, the spirit becomes weary when it carries burdens meant for God. This is why worry leads to restlessness, tension, and inner turmoil. The soul resists what it was never designed to contain. One of the most damaging lies about worry is the belief that letting go means you stop caring. In truth, worry is not the same as care. Care is rooted in love and responsibility. Worry is rooted in fear and control. You can care deeply without worrying constantly. When worry takes over, it does not deepen your concern. It distorts it. It replaces trust with fear and faith with pressure. God invites you to care with wisdom, but to trust him with outcomes. When you carry worry, you unknowingly assume a role you were never meant to play. You begin acting as though everything depends on you, your future, your provision, your relationships, your purpose. This is an exhausting position to live in. Trusting God means stepping out of that false responsibility and returning it to the one who actually holds power over it. This is not irresponsibility. It is realignment. It is a continual process. The mind naturally returns to fear because fear feels familiar. But every time worry rises, you are given an opportunity to respond differently. You can either grip the burden tighter or open your hands and release it. This act of release is not denial of reality. It is acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. It is saying, I cannot carry this, but God can. As you begin to release worry, you may notice resistance within yourself. The mind often clings to anxiety because it fears the unknown more than the exhaustion of control. Letting go feels vulnerable, but vulnerability is where trust is born. Trust does not remove challenges. It removes the weight of having to face them alone. Over time, something changes when you stop carrying what was never yours. Peace begins to return, not because problems vanish, but because your soul is no longer crushed under their weight. Strength is restored because energy is no longer wasted on fear. Clarity improves because the mind is no longer clouded by anxiety. You begin to live from faith instead of fear. The invitation to release worry is ultimately an invitation to rest. Not passive rest, but spiritual rest. A deep assurance that God is actively involved in every detail of your life. When you trust Him, you stop striving to hold everything together and allow Him to do what only He can do. You were not created to carry the weight of uncertainty, fear, and control. You were created to walk in trust. The moment you begin to release worry, you align yourself with the way your soul was designed to live dependent, secure, and at peace in God. Control feels safe because it gives the illusion of certainty. When life becomes unpredictable, the instinctive response is to tighten the grip, to manage every detail, to plan every step so nothing goes wrong. But this instinct, while understandable, becomes the breeding ground for worry. The deeper a person believes everything depends on their ability to manage outcomes, the heavier anxiety becomes. This is why trust does not begin with confidence in self. It begins with surrender. Trust is born at the exact point where control ends. Many people do not realize how much of their stress is rooted in the need to control. They replay conversations, anticipate problems, and rehearse future scenarios, believing that mental effort will prevent pain. But control has limits. No amount of planning can eliminate uncertainty, and no level of vigilance can guarantee safety. When you try to control what is beyond your reach, you do not gain peace. You lose it. Worry enters where control becomes an obsession rather than a tool. Letting go of control is often misunderstood as passivity or irresponsibility. In reality, surrendering control to God is an act of profound wisdom. It is recognizing the difference between what you can influence and what only God can govern. You are responsible for obedience, faithfulness, and wise decisions, not outcomes. Outcomes belong to God. The moment you accept this distinction, a heavy burden begins to lift. Control feeds the false belief that if something goes wrong, it is because you did not do enough. This belief creates constant self-pressure and quiet guilt. Every delay feels like a personal failure. Every obstacle like a reflection of inadequacy. Trust interrupts this cycle. Trust says that even when things do not unfold as planned, God is still at work. It releases you from the crushing responsibility of having to make every ng succeed. The end of control does not mean the end of effort. You still plan, work, and prepare, but with an open hand. Instead of gripping outcomes tightly, you place them in God's care. This shift changes how you experience challenges. Problems no longer feel like threats to your identity. They become opportunities to rely on God's strength rather than your own. One of the hardest aspects of surrender is silence. When you release control, you often lose the constant mental noise of planning and worrying. That silence can feel uncomfortable at first because it exposes how much you relied on anxiety to feel engaged. But within that silence, trust begins to grow. You learn to listen instead of panic, to pray instead of overthink. Trust requires humility because it demands acknowledgement of limitation. It admits that your understanding is partial and your power is finite. This admission is not defeat, it is freedom. When you stop pretending to be in control, you create space for God to lead. Humility opens the door for peace, while pride and self-control keeps it locked. There are moments when surrender feels risky, especially when the stakes are high. The future feels uncertain, and fear whispers that letting go will result in loss. But control has never prevented loss. It has only intensified fear of it. Trust, on the other hand, does not guarantee comfort, but it guarantees companionship. You may not know what comes next, but you know you will not face it alone. As trust deepens, something shifts internally. The urgency that once dominated your thoughts begins to fade. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally. Decisions are no longer driven by fear of failure, but guided by faith. This does not mean life becomes predictable. It means your heart becomes anchored. The end of control is not the loss of direction. It is the beginning of guidance. When you release your need to manage everything, you become more aware of God's leading. You recognize that his timing is intentional, his delays purposeful, and his ways higher than your own. What once felt like chaos begins to reveal order, an order shaped by divine wisdom rather than human anxiety. Trust is not proven in moments of clarity, but in moments of uncertainty. Anyone can trust when outcomes are visible, but true trust is choosing peace when answers are absent. It is standing still when the urge is to panic, resting when the instinct is to strive. When control ends, rest begins, not rest from responsibility, but rest from fear. Rest from the exhausting need to hold everything together. In surrender, you discover that God has been holding your life all along. And in that realization, trust finally finds its place. Worry speaks a language of endless possibilities, most owe. If them dark, uncertain, and frightening, it constantly asks, what if this goes wrong? What if it gets worse? What if I fail? What if I lose everything? These questions loop in the mind, creating fear before anything has even happened. Worry lives in the imagination, painting pictures of futures that may never come. It traps the heart in anticipation of pain, convincing you that preparing for the worst is the same as being wise. But this way of thinking slowly erodes peace and replaces hope with dread. Trust speaks a very different language. Trust does not deny that things could go wrong. It simply refuses to believe that wrong outcomes have the final word. Where worry asks, what if? Trust declares, even if the door closes, even if the answer is delayed, even if the outcome is not what I hope for, even if I don't understand the reason, trust stands firm, not because circumstances are guaranteed to improve, but because God's faithfulness is guaranteed to remain. The phrase even if is powerful because it shifts the foundation of peace. Worry builds peace on favorable outcomes. Trust builds peace on God's character. When your peace depends on things going right, it becomes fragile, easily shattered by bad news or unexpected delays. But when your peace rests in God, it becomes steady. Situations may change, but your inner stability does not. Worry demands certain time. Nifty before it allows rest. It says you can relax only after every variable is accounted for. Trust allows rest in the absence of certainty. It understands that not knowing does not mean not being held. Trust recognizes that God does not need to explain everything to remain trustworthy. Faith does not require full clarity. It requires confidence in who God is. Living in what if keeps you trapped in fear of the future. It causes you to mentally live in days that have not yet arrived, carrying burdens that do not yet exist. This robs you of strength and joy in the present moment. Trust, however, anchors you in the now. It says, I will face tomorrow when it comes, but today I will walk in faith. This mindset frees the heart from unnecessary suffering. The even if mentality is not passive or resigned. It is courageous. It is the decision to stand firm regardless of outcomes. It is the refusal to let fear dictate obedience or steal peace. Trust does not say, I expect the worst. It says, I expect God to remain good no matter what happens. That expectation changes everything. Worry magnifies uncertainty until it feels unbearable. Trust acknowledges uncertainty without being overwhelmed by it. It understands that uncertainty is not the enemy, fear is. When you adopt an even if faith, uncertainty loses its power to intimidate you. You no longer need guarantees to move forward. You move forward because God is with you. This kind of trust develops resilience. When life does not go according to plan, worry collapses, but trust adapts. Trust allows disappointment without despair. It allows grief without hopelessness. It allows questions without bitterness. You may feel pain, but you are not destroyed by it because your faith was never placed in perfect circumstances. Many people hesitate to trust because they fear disappointment. They believe that trusting God fully sets them up for heartbreak if things don't work out. But the truth is, worry does not protect you from disappointment. It only makes you suffer twice. Trust, on the other hand, gives you strength to face whatever comes. It does not guarantee comfort, but it guarantees stability. Even if faith transforms how you view setbacks, what once looked like failure begins to look like redirection. What once felt like loss begins to feel like preparation. This does not mean every painful moment suddenly feels good. It means pain no longer feels pointless. Trust believes that God can work through outcomes you did not choose. As trust deepens, fear loses its authority. You stop needing reassurance at every step. You stop demanding answers before obeying. You learn to walk forward with confidence, knowing that God's presence is more important than predictable results. This kind of faith produces peace that cannot be shaken by circumstances. Worry asks you to imagine everything that could go wrong. Trust asks you to remember everything God has already carried you through. One looks forward with fear, the other looks back with gratitude. When you choose trust, you anchor your heart in God's faithfulness rather than your fears. Living with an even if mindset does not make you careless. It makes you courageous. It frees you to love fully, serve boldly, and move forward without being paralyzed by fear. You no longer live at the mercy of outcomes. You live under the covering of God's faithfulness. When worry says, what if it all falls apart? Trust answers, even if it does, God will still be with me. And in that assurance, fear loses its grip and peace takes its place. And many people believe peace will arrive once their problems disappear. They tell themselves that when the situation improves, when the answer comes, when the pressure lifts, then they will finally rest. But this belief keeps peace forever out of reach because life rarely offers a season without challenges. New problems replace old ones, and uncertainty is always waiting at the door. If peace depends on the absence of trouble, it will always be fragile. True peace is not found when everything around you is calm. It is found when God is present within you. Peace that comes from God is different from temporary relief. Relief comes when a problem is solved. Peace comes when the heart is anchored. Relief depends on circumstances. Peace depends on trust. This is why some people can remain calm in the middle of chaos, while others are anxious even in comfort. The difference is not the absence of problems, but the presence of faith. When you trust God, peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you carry. Problems have a way of demanding attention. They fill the mind with urgency and the heart with pressure. Without trust, these pressures multiply, turning challenges into sources of fear. But when you are aware of God's presence, those same challenges lose their power to overwhelm you. You may feel concern, but you are not consumed by it. God's presence does not always change the situation immediately, but it changes how you experience it. Many people misunderstand peace as emotional numbness. They assume that if they still feel stress, sadness, or uncertainty, they must not have peace. But peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the stability beneath emotion. It allows you to feel deeply without falling apart. God's peace does not remove feeling. It provides grounding. Discarding does not mean negative thoughts will never come. It means they no longer take control. Fear may knock, but it does not have to enter. Doubt may whisper, but it does not have to dominate. Peace acts as an inner boundary, protecting you from being overwhelmed by what you face. When peace is rooted in God's presence, it becomes unshakable. Circumstances can change suddenly, but the foundation remains intact. This is why trust is so essential. Without trust, peace collapses under pressure. With trust, peace remains steady. Even when answers are delayed and outcomes uncertain, God's presence also brings clarity in chaos. When anxiety dominates, the mind becomes scattered, making even small decisions feel heavy. Peace restores focus. It allows you to think clearly, respond wisely, and act intentionally. You are no longer driven by panic, but guided by faith. This clarity is not the result of perfect conditions, but of divine assurance. Living in God's peace does not mean avoiding difficulties. It means walking through them with confidence that you are not alone. When you know God is with you, fear loses its grip. The unknown becomes less threatening because it is no longer faced in isolation. You may not know the path ahead, but you trust the one who walks with you. The presence of God also transforms how you interpret problems. Instead of seeing them as signs of abandonment, you begin to see them as moments where God's faithfulness can be revealed. Trust allows you to believe that God is at work even when circumstances seem contradictory. This belief sustains peace when logic fails. Many people try to manufacture peace through distractions, control, or avoidance. These methods may provide temporary comfort, but they cannot sustain the soul. Only God's presence can bring lasting peace. When you rely on Him, peace becomes a state of being rather than a fleeting feeling. Peace grows as trust deepens. The more you learn to rely on God, the less power circumstances have over your inner world. This does not happen overnight, but over time, you begin to notice a shift. Situations that once triggered panic now invite prayer. Challenges that once caused despair now strengthen faith. God's peace does know. He promises a trouble-free life, but it promises a steady heart. It does not guarantee immediate solutions, but it guarantees divine companionship. And that companionship changes everything. When you know God is near, fear fades, anxiety loosens its grip, and peace takes root. Peace is not the reward for perfect circumstances. It is the fruit of trust. As you choose to trust God daily, you discover that peace was never waiting for problems to end. It was waiting for you to rest in His presence. In trusting God is often mistaken for weakness because the world teaches that strength means independence, self-reliance, and control. From an early age, people are conditioned to believe that needing help is a failure and that depending on someone else is a risk. This mindset slowly shapes how faith is viewed. When challenges arise, trusting God can feel like surrendering power rather than exercising it. But this belief is deeply flawed. Trust is not weakness. It is one of the strongest positions a person can take. Weakness is pretending you can carry everything alone. Weakness is exhausting yourself, trying to manage outcomes that are beyond your reach. Weakness is allowing fear to dictate your decisions because you are afraid of losing control. Trust, on the other hand, requires courage. It takes strength to admit limitations. It takes faith to acknowledge that your understanding is incomplete, and that your power has an endpoint. Trust does not deny effort. It redefines where effort belongs. True strength begins with humility. Humility is not self-degradation. It is honest self-awareness. It recognizes that no matter how capable or determined you are still human. Your vision is limited to the present, your knowledge to what you have learned, and your power to what your hands can touch. God, however, sees the full picture. Trusting Him is not giving up authority. It is aligning yourself with the higher one. Many people resist trust because they fear losing control. Control feels powerful, but it is often a mask for fear. When you trust God, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are choosing the right responsibility. You remain responsible for obedience, integrity, and faithfulness. You release responsibility for results. That release requires inner strength because it goes against the instinct to protect yourself through control. Trust also demands emotional strength. It requires facing uncertainty without panic. It means standing steady when answers are delayed and outcomes unclear. Anyone can feel confident when everything is predictable. Real strength is revealed when clarity is absent, yet peace remains. Trust allows you to remain grounded even when circumstances are unstable. There is also strength in obedience. Trusting God often means following directions that do not immediately make sense. It means continuing to do what is right even when results are slow or invisible. This kind of obedience is not passive. It is active faith. It requires discipline, patience, and resilience. Weakness gives up when progress is not immediate. Trust perseveres because it believes that God is working beyond what can be seen. Another reason trust is misunderstood is because it does not eliminate struggle. People assume that if they truly trusted God, life would become easier when challenges persist. They interpret trust as ineffective. But strength is not measured by the absence of struggle. It is measured by endurance. Trust gives you the strength to endure without becoming bitter, fearful, or broken. Trust also protects you from burnout. When everything depends on you, the pressure is relentless. You never rest because failure feels catastrophic. Trust removes that pressure by reminding you that God is ultimately responsible for outcomes. This does not make you careless. It makes you sustainable. You work with excellence, but you rest with confidence. Depending on God requires strength because it forces you to confront pride. Pride insists on self-sufficiency. Trust dismantles that illusion. It teaches you that real security is not found in personal ability, but in divine faithfulness. Letting go of pride is not easy, but it is freeing. It allows you to live without the constant pressure to prove yourself. Trust also strengthens character, develops patience when answers are delayed, gratitude when resources are limited, and hope when circumstances are discouraging. These qualities do not grow in comfort. They grow in reliance on God. Trust shapes the inner life, making you resilient rather than reactive. When you trust God, you are not avoiding responsibility. You are embracing the right one. You choose faith over fear, obedience over anxiety, and humility over pride. This choice requires strength because it often goes against emotion and instinct. It is easier to panic than to trust. It is easier to control than to surrender. But what is easier is not always strong. Over time, trust transforms how you see yourself. You no longer define strength by how much you can carry, but by how well you can release. You no longer measure power by control, but by peace. You discover that trusting God does not make you fragile. It makes you firm. Trust is strength because it stands when fear rises, rests when pressure builds, and remains faithful when outcomes are uncertain. It is not the absence of effort. It is effort guided by faith. And in that strength, the soul finds stability, resilience, and peace. Waiting is often interpreted as delay, and delay is frequently mistaken for denial. When prayers are not answered quickly and progress feels slow, the natural conclusion is that nothing is happening. This assumption fuels frustration, discouragement, and doubt, but waiting is not empty time. It is not a pause in God's activity. Waiting is a season with purpose, designed not to weaken faith, but to refine it. What feels like stillness on the surface often hides deep work beneath. Many people view waiting as wasted time because it does not produce immediate results. The culture of instant gratification has trained the mind to measure value by speed, but God is not bound by human urgency. He is intentional, not hurried. When he allows waiting, it is not because he is unconcerned, but because he is preparing something greater than what immediate answers could provide. Waiting exposes what the heart truly relies on. When progress stalls, distractions fade, and expectations are tested. In these moments, impatience rises because control is removed. But this loss of control is not punishment. It is invitation. Waiting invites trust to grow where certainty once lived. It shifts reliance from visible outcomes to unseen faithfulness. During waiting seasons, God often works inwardly before working outwardly. While circumstances appear unchanged, character is being shaped, patience is being strengthened, humility is being deepened, endurance is being formed. These qualities cannot be rushed because they are built through repeated moments of surrender. Waiting becomes the environment where faith matures. Frustration in waiting usually comes from misunderstanding its purpose. If waiting is viewed as an obstacle, it becomes unbearable. But when it is understood as preparation, it becomes meaningful. Preparation often feels uncomfortable because it stretches capacity. God uses waiting to enlarge the heart so it can hold what is coming without this preparation. Blessings can become burdens and opportunities can become overwhelming. Waiting also teaches discernment. In the absence of immediate answers, the noise of urgency quiets, allowing clarity to develop. Decisions are no longer rushed. Motives are examined. Priorities are realigned. What once felt essential may be revealed as unnecessary. Waiting strips away distractions, refining focus and direction. One of the hardest aspects of waiting is silence. When God seems quiet, fear fills the gap. The mind begins to question, doubt, and assume abandonment. But silence does not equal absence. Some of the deepest work God does happens in quiet seasons. Silence often means he is teaching you to listen more deeply rather than rely on constant reassurance. Waiting also tests perseverance. It challenges the temptation to quit, compromise, or settle prematurely. Many people abandon faith in the waiting not because God failed, but because endurance became uncomfortable. But perseverance is not passive. It is active trust, continuing to believe, obey, and hope even when evidence is scarce. In waiting, faith shifts from expectation of outcomes to confidence in God's character. You learn to trust not because answers are visible, but because God has proven faithful before. This kind of trust is deeper and more stable. It does not collapse when circumstances fluctuate. It anchors the soul. Waiting reshapes how success is measured. Instead of focusing solely on achievement, growth becomes visible in maturity. Peace becomes more valuable than speed. Wisdom becomes more important than immediacy. God uses waiting to redefine what truly matters. Many breakthroughs fail not because God withholds them, but because the heart is not yet ready to sustain them. Waiting prepares the foundation. It aligns timing, strengthens faith, and ensures that when the door opens, you are not only ready to enter, but equipped to remain. As waiting continues, something subtle changes. Anxiety lessens, not because answers appear, but because trust deepens. The need to control fades, replaced by quiet confidence. You begin to rest even without resolution. This rest is evidence that waiting is doing its work. Waiting is not a punishment. It is a process. It is not wasted time. It is formative time. God does not delay wealthy without intention. Every moment of waiting is shaping something within you that will serve you long after the season ends. When waiting finally gives way to movement, the growth becomes evident. You are stronger, wiser, and more grounded. What once felt like delay is revealed as preparation, and you realize that nothing was wasted. Waiting did not weaken your faith, it strengthened it. And trust is often imagined as a single defining moment, a decision made once that settles everything forever. But in reality, trust is built through repetition. It is formed in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. It is strengthened through consistent choices, not sudden breakthroughs. Every day presents countless opportunities to either feed worry or nurture faith. Trust grows not through perfection, but through persistence. Anxiety does not usually arrive all at once. It appears in small waves. An unexpected thought, a troubling message, a delayed response, an uncertain outcome. In each moment, a choice is presented. You can allow the thought to spiral, or you can interrupt it. You can rehearse fear, or you can release it through prayer. Trust is practiced in these small decisions. Over time, these choices shape the condition of the heart. Many people wait for their emotions to change before they choose trust. But trust is not dependent on feelings. It is an act of will. You choose to trust and when anxiety is present. You choose to believe even when fear whispers. This choice may need to be repeated many times a day. Trust is not proven by the absence of worry, but by the refusal to let worry dominate. Daily trust requires awareness. It begins with recognizing when worry is rising. Without awareness, anxiety operates unchecked, quietly shaping thoughts and reactions. When you become attentive to your inner state, you gain the ability to respond intentionally. Awareness turns reaction into response. It creates space for trust to enter. Each moment of trust reinforces faith, just as worry strengthens fear through repetition. Trust strengthens peace through consistency. The mind learns new patterns. What once triggered panic now invites prayer. What once caused restlessness now becomes an opportunity for surrender. Over time, trust reshapes the inner landscape. Trust also involves discipline. It requires redirecting thoughts that drift toward fear. This redirection is not denial. It is focus. You acknowledge the concern, but you refuse to dwell on it. You choose to place your attention on God rather than on worst-case scenarios. This discipline is not restrictive. It is freeing. It breaks the cycle of mental exhaustion. Daily trust builds resilience. When challenges arise, you are not starting from zero. Each previous act of trust has strengthened your foundation. Faith becomes a habit rather than a reaction. You no longer rely on intense emotion to sustain belief. Trust becomes part of how you live. There will be days when trust feels easier and days when it feels heavy. This does not mean faith is failing. It means trust is being exercised. Just as muscles grow through resistance, faith grows through challenge. Each time you choose trust under pressure, it becomes stronger. Trust also grows through honesty. Pretending fear does not exist weakens faith. Acknowledging fear and choosing trust in its presence strengthens it. God does not require you to feel confident before you trust him. He invites you to bring fear with you and still choose faith. Over time, daily trust changes perspective. Problems no longer feel overwhelming because you have repeatedly experienced God's faithfulness. Even when answers were delayed, you were sustained. Even when outcomes were uncertain, peace remained. These memories reinforce trust, making it easier to choose again. Daily trust does not remove responsibility. It redefines it. You remain responsible for obedience, integrity, and faithfulness. You release responsibility for controlling outcomes. This shift reduces anxiety and restores balance. You do what you can and trust God with what you cannot. Consistency matters more than intensity. A quiet, steady faith outlasts emotional highs. Trust that is. Practice daily becomes stable and dependable. It does not collapse under pressure because it has been built over time. As trust becomes a daily rhythm, worry loses its authority. It may still appear, but it no longer controls your actions or steals your peace. You become quicker to release fear and slower to react impulsively. This transformation does not happen overnight, but it is certain. Trust is not a destination. It is a way of walking. Each day, each moment, each decision shapes it. When you choose trust repeatedly, you discover that faith is not fragile. It is resilient, steady, and capable of carrying you through uncertainty with peace. Many people live mentally ahead of their lives. Their bodies exist in the present, but their minds are constantly racing into tomorrow. They rehearse conversations that have not happened, fear outcomes that are not certain, and carry responsibilities that do not yet exist. This habit creates a quiet exhaustion because the soul was never designed to live in the future. When worry takes hold, tomorrow's weight is pulled into today, making the present moment heavy and overwhelming. Tomorrow has its own challenges, but it also has its own grace. When you try to carry both today and tomorrow at the same time, you overburden your heart. God never asked you to solve tomorrow's problems today. He calls you to be faithful in the present moment. Trusting God means recognizing that today is where obedience lives, where faith is practiced, and where peace is available. Worry creates the illusion that thinking about tomorrow will prepare you for it. In reality, it weakens you. Anxiety drains the strength needed for today, leaving you less equipped for whatever comes next. Trust restores that strength by allowing you to focus fully on the present. When your attention is centered on today, you are able to respond wisely rather than react fearfully. Faithfulness in the present is powerful because it is manageable. You may not know how the entire journey will unfold, but you can take the next step. You can choose obedience now. You can choose trust now. God does not overwhelm you with the full picture. He invites you to walk step by step. Each step taken in trust builds confidence for the next. Carrying tomorrow's weight often leads to burnout because it creates constant pressure to predict outcomes. This pressure is relentless and unrealistic. Trust releases you from this burden. It reminds you that God already exists in your future. He is not surprised by what is bad coming, nor is he unprepared. What feels unknown to you is already known to him. Living in the present does not mean ignoring the future. Planning has its place. But planning becomes destructive when it turns into fear-driven anticipation. Trust allows you to plan without panic. You prepare wisely, then release the outcome. You acknowledge the future without allowing it to dominate your thoughts. When you focus on today, gratitude grows. You become more aware of what is present rather than what is missing. Gratitude strengthens faith because it reminds you of God's ongoing provision. Even in uncertainty, there is evidence of grace in the present moment. Trust opens your eyes to that grace. Trusting God with tomorrow also reshapes your understanding of success. Success is no longer measured by certainty or control, but by faithfulness. You succeed when you trust today, obey today, and rest today. The outcome belongs to God. This perspective removes pressure and restores peace. Many people fear that letting go of tomorrow will make them irresponsible. In truth, it makes them more grounded. When you are fully present, you make clear decisions. You respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Trust brings focus, not neglect. The present moment is where God meets you. He does not meet you in imagined futures or feared outcomes. He meets you where you are. When you're meek and is consumed by tomorrow, you miss his presence today. Trust brings you back into alignment with where God is working. As you learn to release tomorrow's weight, peace becomes more accessible. You stop living under constant tension. You discover that rest is not found in certainty, but in surrender. God does not require you to see the whole path. He asks you to walk faithfully in the light you have. Over time, this practice transforms the way you experience life. Anxiety loses its grip because it no longer controls your attention. The future no longer feels threatening because it is placed in God's hands. You learn to live one day at a time, not out of limitation, but out of trust. Tomorrow will come with its own challenges, but it will also come with God's presence. You are not asked to carry what has not yet arrived. Today has enough grace for today. When you trust God with tomorrow, you free your heart to live fully now. And in that freedom, peace becomes not a distant hope, but a present reality.